50 Jahre Putsch in Chile, das Ende von einer Zeit linker Regierung unter Salvador Allende, die auch fußte auf einer Arbeiterbewegung in Chile und im Nachklang der 68er-Bewegung mit einem Aufschwung von Klassenkämpfen, der Studentenbewegung und großer Hoffnung auch in diesen Weg zum Sozialismus weltweit. Diese Hoffnung endete im Militärputsch 1973, bei dem Salvador Allende auch noch am selben Tag ums Leben kam, und auch einer Bewegung von unten, die danach durch die Militärdiktatur unter Pinochet von verschiedensten Repressionen, Folter, Tod und so weiter im Blut ertränkt wurde. Daher stellt sich die Frage, warum scheiterte dieser Versuch? Was waren auch die Widersprüche, mit denen die Regierung, aber auch die Bewegung umgehen musste? In welchem Verhältnis dazu stand die Arbeiterbewegung und der Aufstand der Bourgeoisie? Wir haben heute dafür einen Zeitzeugen eingeladen, Mario Nein, der damals auch vor Ort in Chile war, noch als junger Mann, kann er aber wahrscheinlich gleich auch sehr viel mehr dazu erzählen. Der Vortrag wird auf Englisch stattfinden und wir würden dann eine Fragerunde. Okay, gibt's Probleme schon mal mit Englisch? Weil wir haben auch die Möglichkeit, hier eine Flüsterrunde zu organisieren, wo man eine direkte deutsche Übersetzung bekommen kann. Das ist gar kein Problem. Alles klar. Dann machen wir das so. Genau, wir würden dann eine Fragerunde zulassen an Mario Nein, der dann noch zugeschaltet ist. Verschiedenste Nachfragen und dann eben übergehen in eine gemeinsame Diskussionsrunde, die wir hier im Raum machen und dafür dann Zoom wieder abschalten. Der Vortrag wird auch aufgezeichnet werden, kann man also auch nochmal nachschauen, wenn man möchte. Den werden wir dann die Tage hochladen bei Marx 21. Marx 21 ist ein Netzwerk von revolutionären SozialistInnen, die in verschiedensten Bewegungen, in Gewerkschaft und an verschiedenen Kämpfen teilnehmen. Ihr findet hier auch verschiedene Broschüren, Bücher zu unterschiedlichen Themen. Heute vor allem auf die Frage 1968, eine Welt im Aufbruch, Staat und Revolution, die revolutionären Ideen des Karl Marx oder zur Oktoberrevolution und Revolutionstheorie allgemein, weil das ja auch im Prinzip heute das zentrale Thema ist und auch die Lehren, die wir aus den Erfahrungen in Chile ziehen können. Genau, ich weiß nicht, wie aktuell der Stand ist, ob Mario schon in der Zoom ist. Dann würde ich sagen, zur Einleitung vielleicht noch ein paar Worte, weil aktuell ist das Thema und die Frage linkes Regieren oder rebellisches Regieren ja auch in verschiedenen Konstellationen wieder ein Thema und die Frage auch von Reformen oder Revolution. Und ich denke, Chile ist eigentlich ein sehr gutes Beispiel, wie weit der Weg über Parlamente und Regierungen eigentlich kommen kann und was da für Hindernisse sowohl im Staatsapparat als auch in den Widersprüchen, die dann zu der Arbeiterbewegung eigentlich entstehen, damit einhergehen. Insofern haben wir uns überlegt, dass es zum jetzigen Zeitpunkt, wo die Linke in Deutschland in einer schweren Krise auch steckt, sowohl die Partei Die Linke als auch die Gesamtlinke und verschiedene Dinge zu diskutieren hat, dass es Sinn machen würde, mal über diese Grundsatzfrage eigentlich noch nachzudenken und zu diskutieren, wie wir eigentlich dazu stehen, was wir aus der Geschichte lernen können, um nicht Fehler der Vergangenheit zum 100. Mal wieder zu begehen eigentlich. Aber natürlich der Bericht von einem Zeitzeugen, der sich heute auch als revolutionärer Sozialist versteht und organisiert, bietet für uns nochmal ganz andere Einblicke und Analysemöglichkeiten. Genau. Insofern fanden wir das bedeutend, genau über diese Fragen im Hier und Jetzt nachzudenken. Ich würde es erstmal dabei belassen und wir warten, bis Mario 9 eintrifft. Yeah, you're very welcome to start. About 40 minutes. Then we will have some questions for you, and afterwards we will discuss in the round here. Thank you so much for being here. And yeah.
You're absolutely welcome. It has been 50 years since the explosion of revolution in Chile from 1970 to 1973. In spite of the time, I think it is very important to learn the lesson of those extraordinary years that I was involved as a young person. But before, I would like to sort of, I would like to narrate to you the unfolding of the revolution. Let me place it within a historical context of the Chilean Revolution. The decades of the 60th and the 70th were a decades of a struggle against the capitalist system worldwide. Here I'm talking about a struggle in the East and in the West. In the East, 1968 in Prague, workers and students rose up against the tyranny of Stalinism. Only those regimes sent the tanks, to put down the uprising. In the West, you do have ferment of rebellions as well. The Vietnam War arose the spirit of resistance, not only the Vietnamese fighters, but also outside of the country. Enormous movements against the war, students and workers in the heart of the system in Europe and America, as well as in the periphery in country like Chile, for example. In exactly the same decade of the 60s, Black people rose up against segregation and the ugly face of racism, with a spectacular demonstration that ended up the Black Panther Party challenging the state by armed means. But the peak of this epoch of rebellions, it happened in France, of course, in 1968, where 10 million workers that were on strike for 3 weeks. And the ruling class feared not only just uprising, but the spectrum of revolution. Just 2 years later, a full-out revolution began unfolding in my own country. With the election of Salvador Allende, our president in 1970, created an extraordinary conditions and complex situation in this revolution. For example, the President Allende, with coalition of 2 main political parties, the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, mass working class party that has fought with the workers and the oppressed like the peasant or shantytown dwellers for many, many decades before 1970. They were genuinely mass working class party. With the assumption, I put the word assumption here because they thought the leadership of this, this political party of the revolution, that you could, in reality, change the society by peaceful means. And they called themselves the parliamentary road to socialism, or the gradual sort of, a process until we reach to socialism. That was the theoretical assumption of the political leadership of the revolution. Of course, now in hindsight, we have to understand that the external ruling class, like the US imperialism, which at the time feared enormously another Cuba, because not far away from the United States, this little island rose up and kicked out a corrupt regime and fought against imperialism. So they didn't want another Cuba. And therefore, in the 1960s, they prepared the Latin American ruling class in two ways. The first one, they created a school, a military school that they call the American schools, where all officers, they were trained there. All officers from around the Latin American armies were trained there in the 1960s. And therefore, they were prepared well before the popular unity against any revolution taking place in its backyard, that they call it. Now it isn't so backyard because China is there and Russia is there, but that's another matter. And therefore, they prepare not just ideologically speaking, but also financially to overthrow the Salvador Allende government through the CIA. And now we can hear, comrade, that British imperialism was involved in overthrowing the government. And yesterday I saw the news that the Secret Service of your country were sending, or they were with the knowledge of sending arms to Pinochet, to a sect that it was established in the 1960s, a sect of German colonizers that they were pedophile, really. And that the leader, I think he was in jail in Chile, and now he's dead. And that particular place where they kidnapped children and incarcerated children for many, many, many decades, some of them they escaped with horror story, they were receiving arms from Germany, and the Secret Service of your country were well aware, and I'm sure ministers were well aware as well. I saw this just last night. So the Chilean revolution was facing an enormous powerful forces internally and externally. The Chilean ruling class immediately was on the offensive. Before the inauguration of Salvador Allende as a president, a group of extremists from the far right killed a general. He was called Schneider. The purpose was to stop Salvador Allende becoming a president of Chile. That was the first act of violence of the Chilean ruling class. So the peaceful transition to socialism was tested immediately. Now, what was the program of the Popular Unity government? To tell you the truth, comrades, it was a very progressive program in comparison to what's going on around the world now. For example, the program was free education, free health, houses for the poor, nationalization of few industries, primarily at the hand of foreign multinational companies like the US, and they created, comrade, the first university for working class students in Chile. It was a wide, nationwide university. And the students at that time, the revolutionary students, arose with the revolution as well. If somebody would like to ask a question, I could go a bit deeper, the role of the students in the revolution. Now, also, they gave half of liter of milk to every single child in the country. For you living in Germany, I don't think so it's much. I would probably is a lot now because of the crisis that is going on. But in Chile was an extremely important aid for the nutrition of children. By the way, in this country, there was exactly the same policy of giving milk to school children, and Margaret Thatcher took it away in her madness of neoliberalism. So you could see that it was a very progressive, indeed, more progressive, of course, than neoliberalism. It was really a challenge of neoliberalism if they were imposed in this country again. In the 3 years, the Popular Unity government was the best government in the history of our nation. That was really a remarkable achievement in spite of the hostility internally and externally. The hostility from the Chilean ruling class, a powerful Chilean ruling class, began in earnest in parliament, of course, blocking every single law and policy brought by the Popular Unity government. They brought out the middle class in the streets and the small fascist party at the head of any demonstration that they organized. This fascist party was called, oh my God, I can't remember now, but you can look it at somewhere. So the Chilean situation began to polarize to such an extent that now I can recall how fast is time in revolutionary times. It seems that days go so quickly because there are a constellation of contradiction and action, demonstration, counter-demonstration, and so on. And in an election, this is a municipal election in 1971, if I do remember well my memory, the Popular Unity increased the share of the vote. In other words, the population was very well behind of the president. In fact, millions and millions of Chileans, they celebrated with joy that at last we elected our government, a government for the people, a government for the majority. There was joy up and down Chile in that particular inauguration, the 4th of September in 1970. The Popular Unity brought hope, but also brought an extraordinary militancy. The first year of the government, there were countless or hundreds of strikes, workers demanding their right, because the Chilean Revolution brought a very radicalized militancy of workers. They have fought in the 30s, in the 40s, in the 50s, in the 60s, and they were very well organized. So the class struggle got to such an intensity that two camps, they were facing each other almost daily. And the daily confrontation was who controlled the street. Is it the reactionary forces, or is it the workers, or is it the shantytown dwellers, or our neighborhood communities? We fought to control the street, a very important element in a revolutionary process, because if you don't control the street, the reactionary forces could march to the trade union places, to the workplaces, to the shantytown dwellers. We understood that because the class struggle itself, it was showing the necessity of organization. And I think the peak of that organization and militancy from below, it happened in 1972. In 1972, the ruling class and US imperialism began a strike. They want to paralyze and strangle economically the country and ask the resignation of Allende because the pressure was an enormous one. What happened in that particular time in 1972? It created, the constellation of contradiction to a single point. Either the Chilean revolution was going to die or the Chilean revolution was going to keep fighting. The bosses ordered all their members to shut down everything, absolutely everything, from factories, offices, schools, hospitals, etc., etc., etc. And here, the Chilean working class rose to an astonishing self-organization. And it was called cordones industriales. In English, is industrial belt. What was really the industrial belt? Simple workers' committee taking over the means of production of the ruling class, the bosses, meaning workers, they began open up the factories and told the bosses, this is our factories now. We're going to run it collectively, and we're going to discuss what kind of production and the distribution of our products. We are the master of the factory now. And it wasn't just in one. There is an estimation. This is estimation by academics that I have read, that in the whole cordones industriales movement, there was 1,000 workers involved in it. Now, I have always asked my question, how in such a short period of time, there was this kind of organization that spread like a wildfire? The reason is, historically speaking, the trade union movement has been highly political. That is to say, the influence of the Communist Party was enormous, and the influence of the Socialist Party was absolutely enormous. So before the cordones industriales began, there was already interconnected political cells, groups, and therefore, when the industrial belt sprang up, they coordinated with other industrial belts and began this huge movement. Now, of course, the popular unity was very dissatisfied because in the program, it wasn't about expropriation of the means of production. For them, it was nationalization. Nationalization, comrades, as you know, a particular industries goes into the state hand, but that state is belong to the ruling class. It's a capitalist state. Expropriation is a completely different one. Workers took over, and all, the means of production were for them to produce, how and when discussed collectively. That was an impressive self-organization of the Chilean working class. I could claim, I could be wrong in this, comrade, it went deeper than the Portuguese Revolution. It was deeper than the Iranian Revolution. I could be wrong, probably, because I'm from that country. I'm so proud of the working people of Chile. But that was the response of the insurrection of the bourgeoisie. In fact, the popular movement saved the government of Salvador Allende. Without them, I could say that was the end of the experiment of the popular unity. And unfortunately, the popular unity, instead to encourage more workers to be more militant, to take more factory, more land, and the landless, homeless, and so on, the students, they didn't say that. They put 3 generals in the government to please the ruling class. And that sent an enormous confusion amongst our ranks. Even as a young man, I couldn't really understand what was going on. On the one, it was our government, but on the other hand, military repressing us. They passed a law to search for arms in every single working class neighborhood, in every single factories, in every single in the countryside as well, looking for arms. In reality, there wasn't any arm. We were completely disarmed. That was really the reality. A month before the final attack on the government, a regiment rose up in Santiago, the capital city. They marched to the city center with tanks and I don't know how many soldiers, infantry, and began fighting in the city center. The defender of the Moneda Palace, with the aid of a general called Pratt, General Pratt, who later was killed by the dictatorship in Buenos Aires by a terrorist explosion under his car. He brought his troops out and defeated, the conspirators. Now, I was there. I have to point out that I was only 18 years old. So my political formation was the bread and butter of a poor. I lived in a shanty town nearly all my life until I came to exile. So my front, it wasn't in the industrial belt. But I went to the demonstration because the Chilean revolution engulfed every single oppressed in capitalist society. Either they're women, indigenous people, shantytown dwellers, blacks, I don't know, gays, etc., etc. So I was part of that enormous movement. And that gigantic movement, for a little while, was in command of the revolution after the defeat of the bosses' strike. But then there was another extraordinary confusion. The government was asking workers to give back those expropriated factories. Now, you could think how the workers, they felt. And they decided to say, no, we're not going to do that. In fact, I was in a massive demonstration after the first attempt of the military coup d'etat, and I saw Salvador Allende at the balcony, saying that he was a Democrat, he was going to respect the constitution of the country, and he wasn't prepared to shut down the parliament and urge workers to stop the confrontation and give back the factories. You could imagine, in the head of the participants, it was like a cold ice behind your back because you couldn't really understand. Let me say one word about Salvador Allende. And I give you this image, if I do have a little bit of time, just to demonstrate the president, Salvador Allende. I saw this documentary program, I think it was a French documentary program that they were filming in the graveyard of Salvador Allende in the center of Santiago, Cementerio General. And eventually they saw this group of children, no more than 9, 10, 11, 12, dressed in rags with a bunch of flour. And the reporter said, "What are you doing here?" And the most assertive one came at the front and he said, "We came here to pay our respect to our comrade Salvador Allende." Comrade, I'm talking about a child of 12 or 13 years old. I was extremely moved when I saw that. And then the reporter said, "Why?" And he said, "Very simple. My president fought for the poor, and I am poor. And to end this, in unison, they cried, 'Long live Compañero Allende.'" That impressed me enormously. Now, if a little child that didn't witness, the terror of counter-revolution, they do have that kind of memory in their heart, imagine the rest of the population. Allende still lives in the memory and in the heart of workers, shantytown dwellers, indigenous people, in spite of the present brat that they want to erase that memory. So he was an incredible man, very, very valiant or courageous. He died really with a machine gun defending the Chilean revolution. That was really our President Allende. But unfortunately, in spite of his greatness, by the way, he was one of the most brilliant orators that I have ever heard. In the last seconds of his life, he knew he was under attack by fighter jets on his Moneda Palace, and he gave the last of his speech of his life minutes before his life was over. And it is one of the most moving, incredible, and historical speech. That was really Salvador Allende, a very, very honest politician. He fought all his life at the side of the poor, but the tragic end, it has to teach us that this society cannot be reformed, comrades. It wasn't the first time that we're talking about a transition to socialism bit by bit in a gradual form. I'm sure you're aware of your own history. Weinstein, Klauski talked about that kind of language, that somehow we can change this society using the parameters of the system. And the question is very clear in Chile. There isn't a peaceful transition to socialism because they use the entirely army, comrades, the entirely apparatus of repression against the whole population. When I'm talking about fighter jets attacking, the palace where the whole of the political decision is made, that is savage. I have no idea whether other rulers have done that. We were looking from my shantytown, and a spectacle that it was like a film, literally speaking. They sent tanks, artilleries, to neighborhood parts. The peasants suffered enormous. The indigenous people which belong to the Mapuches people suffered enormously. And of course, the working class. In fact, the Committee of the Industrial Belt wrote an open letter to Salvador Allende that you can have it in the archive in Spanish. And it's a long letter, but it says something that it is always in the head of the survivors and a memory for the present and future generation. It says, Compañero Allende, what are we doing to defend the Chilean revolution? We are in our post. We will defend it with our life. But what is really the plan? We are in a very, very dangerous situation. In fact, they said a terrible, a frightening midnight is approaching. What are we doing, comrades? Compañero Allende. Of course, there was no plan. And the clock struck at 12, and the Chilean ruling class unleashed one of the most violent aggression against a completely disarmed population. Completely disarmed population. That was the end in blood, the peaceful Chilean revolution. But also the flower that arose there, that they will never ever kill, it was the industrial belt. It was los cordones industriales. They planted the seed for a new spring, for a new beginning. And that is the reason it's so important, comrades, to remember Chile. It can teach us very, very valuable lessons of the present struggle and the future struggle. I don't know how long do I have, comrade. Can you tell me, please? Can you tell me how long do I have?
I mean, the time is different than we expected now anyway. So
No. How long do I have for my speech?
Let's do like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if that's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, comrade. I'm sorry to ask that. I'm sorry to ask that. I was saying that the industrial belt, how does it happen? I have always asked the question, how workers that at the beginning, they do have reformist ideas and reformist politics in their head, how do they go from that stage in a dialectical way into forming organs and institutions developed by themselves? And the answer, comrade, is not simple, but is straightforward. The Chilean working class and the rest of us, we were facing a mortal danger in 1972. And the task was to keep the economy going. But they went beyond that. They expropriated, the wealth of the bosses. So it was so radical that I have always thought the anonymous workers discussing collectively, now it's our factory, it's collectively run, and we have to discuss what we're going to produce, how we're going to produce, and for whom. That is really the seeds of a new society. It is when Karl Marx talked about that the emancipation of the working class is the act of the working class, I think the Chilean working class showed that they themselves acted to change the social order that they were going through. It was completely an alternative to the program of reforms of the ruling class. I'm sorry, Cameron, I'm going to have a little bit of water. Sorry. It was really an alternative of the whole formula of revolution. But here, comrades, I'm going to end in this, and then we're going to open up the discussion. The necessity to build a revolutionary organization has shown through history, not just in Chile, that is a vital component of a revolution. Without a revolutionary party, we could have another tragedy, and we have had tragedies, like the Arab Spring, for example. Without a revolutionary party to coordinate the struggle nationwide, a mass revolutionary party, because the consciousness of workers, it is uneven. It wasn't that in every single city and workplace there was an industrial belt. No. So the Revolutionary Party task is to coordinate, and at a critical point in the struggle, that moment that George Lucas talked about in the history of class consciousness is so vital. In the class struggle, certain moments appears, and if you don't intervene in that moment, the course of history changes. And the Revolutionary Party has to have a theoretical clarification why we are independent. We are independent to other forces like reformism because we do have our tactics and strategies. But when we talk about our tactics and strategy, it sounds too general. What's supposed to mean that? From my understanding, our strategy and tactics is to put it into action in the living struggle of workers. Let me give you an example. We're facing the rise of the ultra-right and the Nazis around the world. What is really the strategy to stop them? For us, and for sure for you, is the united front. So that is really our core of a strategy. Arguing with workers and non-workers, the necessity to unite ourselves against the common enemy, against the common threat. That is supposed to be an independent revolutionary party, which it doesn't compromise one list or accommodate with reformism. Don't march when the Nazis, they are marching, because that's violent. We said, no, we have to confront the Nazis in the street. And in order to do that, we need people. We need a mass movement nationwide. That is really the strategy of Revolutionary Party. The second strategy that comes to my mind is in strikes. What is the strategy of the revolution, the independent Revolutionary Party? For me, it has to be don't compromise with the union bureaucracy. Organize yourself in rank and file movement in order to win struggle, to challenge bureaucracy. And in every single picket line, we have to put in action that strategy. It's not coming from outside. We have to have workers on a strike and arguing for that strategy of winning a strike. It doesn't mean that we have to accommodate to the trade union bureaucracy, because they're very, very, very powerful, comrades. And in fact, I could claim, and this is, how can I put it? Reformism is a barrier for socialism. But reformists, they are not our enemy. In the list, we have to work with them because they are at our side. They are not our enemies. But we have to challenge them about how to win strikes, how to win, the state power, who will be, the class in a socialist society, running society. For us, it's the working class. It's a long, hard task, but we don't compromise. We don't accommodate ourselves. So if we had the Revolutionary Party in the Chilean situation, at that moment, that precise moment, when arose a revolutionary party would have said all powers to the industrial belt, all power of the masses of workers and non-workers, and urge the institution of the bourgeoisie and call the working class soldiers coming to our side. And in fact, there was a glimpse of that in 1972 of the first attempt of the coup d'etat, where soldiers and workers, they were fraternizing amongst them after the battle, because the army is the mirror of capitalism. At the top, you do have the generals and the officer, in the middle, and the vast member of the army, they are working class people. In critical moment, in the heat of the struggle, when they see workers in action, like taking over factories, controlling the streets, and imposing, they will, we can break the army. We can break the army. We have to look the Russian Revolution, of course, completely different situation. Soldiers, they didn't really want to die hungry and without any boots for the Tsar. And there will be one point that soldiers, our soldiers, belong to our class. They're going to have this thing. I don't really want to die in a foreign war for you, or coming home completely mad, or coming home with missing body parts like legs and arms. It will come to the point. One thing we're absolutely sure, because capitalism is riddled with crisis, eruption and resistance will come to the surface, and we have to be prepared well before those extraordinary moments, comrades. Thank you very much. I think I accomplished my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mario. It was a completely inspiring talk. Also for me, I forgot my role as a moderator a bit, but yeah, I enjoyed every minute of it. I hope you did too. I switched to German now, so that people can post questions. Ja, genau. Ich hoffe, ihr habt den Input genauso genossen wie ich auch. Ihr könnt Fragen stellen, sowohl direkt auf Englisch oder auf Spanisch natürlich auch an Mario. In dieser ersten Runde im Chat könnt ihr gerne Fragen auch niederschreiben, die wir dann vorlesen können. Wenn ihr auf Deutsch lieber die Fragen stellen möchtet, weil ihr das auf Englisch euch nicht zutraut, ist das auch kein Problem, dann stellt die und ich fasse die auf Englisch zusammen und gebe die dann an Mario. Genau, ich würde eine doppelt quotierte Redeliste führen. Ihr könnt euch gerne melden und dann... Mario,
Yeah.
do you want to answer the question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. Okay. Let me start with the Nazis, because I think it is important. At the present moment, in Chile, you do have a man which is very near to your the world that you are growing up. His name is Antonio Cast, and he has a very dark background. His father was an army officer in Germany during the Nazis era. He escaped to Chile in the 1950s because apparently there was this denazification in your country. And in Chile, he brought up his very nice family, and the two sons now, they're prominent ultra-right politicians. And when we're talking about ultra-right politicians, they went beyond Bolsonaro or any other sort of open far right. this Antonio Cast is winning popularity in Chile for this simple reason. In 2019, there was an enormous uprising in Chile against neoliberalism. But the left was completely incapable to defend the new constitution that it was written by ordinary people from the social movement, where there were one of the most progressive constitutions, sexual reproduction right, indigenous rights, workers' rights, women's rights, a constitution against neoliberalism then. But why the Chilean rejected that constitution? For this simple reason that the ultra-right, which is behind the whole campaign against the rejection, more or less the powerful and the rich owns a monopoly of the mass communication media. That's one factor. The second factor why they won, that they had an enormous resources in terms of money, publicity, and so on. And they spread fake news, disinformation, terror campaign, and so on. What did the new left government did? Nothing, really. Boris, the president, stood like a neutral. He was supporting the constitution, but it didn't call for mass rallies up and down the country, telling brothers and sisters, this is one of the best constitutions ever written for this nation. Discuss it collectively, in your neighborhood, in your workplaces, in your university, and come and agitate to approve this constitution. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And therefore, it left, the ultra-right to win the rejection of this constitution. Now, the new constitution will be written by the so-called experts in a body where the ultra-right were elected 22 of their members to write the constitution, 11 the right, and about 12 the left. In other words, the constitution is entirely in command by the ultra-right because the failure of the left. That is one thing. The second thing is, of course, there is a Nazi connection between all over the world, I could say, where they meet up and so on. Now, are we calling Antonio Cast a Nazi? He has Nazi language, for example, family, the army, the faith, law and order, that kind of thing. The right wing tried to give a solution of the crisis of capitalism by authoritarian means. But it doesn't have a shock troops in the street, as they did the Nazi in your own country, killing workers, intimidating workers, and so on. We're not at that point yet, but it's an open ultra-right situation in Chile. Even, comrade, to figure with this point, there is a commemoration of the 50 years, and they're refusing, to say that the military dictatorship and the violation of human rights, it was an act against humanity. They're refusing to say that. And the president is begging to them to say, please sign this, collective agreement. They're not doing that. Why on earth then the left, a part of the president, called massive rallies up and down the country to commemorate our fallen, to commemorate, the Allende's government, and to resist, this intimidation from the right that the military saved the country against chaos? That's a complete lie. The only way to counter a poison ideology is with mass rallies, action in the streets, in the schools, universities, workplaces. This is the thing that they're not doing. That is one point. The second point is somebody asked, what was the connection between the Chilean Revolution and the rest of the Latin American countries. the Popular Unity government had an enormous impact worldwide, not just in Latin America, even in your own country, because the question was, can we reform society using parliamentary means? And therefore, in Latin America, it had that kind of discussion amongst the left wing, you know, because Chile was Cuba, the guerrilla fighter, took over the country, you know, in a guerrilla warfare in the countryside. In Chile, the Chile Revolution was an urban revolution. Talking to the comrade that was talking about people that they said that it was too quick, and therefore the bourgeoisie was upset, and then, you know, they justify the military coup d'etat. In revolution, comrades, the time is very, very short. When classes and the forces of the classes confront each other, there isn't, you know, a long time. In fact, it's such a short time that those fighting, you know, for a new society and those fighting to preserve this social order is very, very, very limited. That is really the nature of the revolution. What frightened the ruling class and imperialism, that the popular unity couldn't control the militancy of workers from below. That was really in the final analysis, I could say. And counter-revolution, it doesn't pardon because you were a reformist, is to castigate in the most brutal way, you know, to every single opponent. Chile, it had a long night of 70 years of oppression, hunger, intimidation, and torture. That's really the crisis that we went through. Somebody talk about MIR, a revolutionary group that was born in the 1960s, and they were very, very heavily influenced by the Cuban Revolution. And they found that they were students, and great, they were revolutionary students, but that particular political party wasn't belong to the Popular Unity. But what was their strategy? Very simple, comrade. They thought the most oppressed group in capitalist society was the trigger for a social revolution. For them was the shanty town dwellers and the peasantry, not the organized working class. But here is a contradiction, answering another question. When we're talking about the political parties, the leader of the Chilean Revolution, like the Communist Party and the Socialist Party, it wasn't a smooth, monolithic party. There was tension in the ranks. For example, communist workers or socialist workers involved in the industrial belt, in the cordones industriales, they had an enormous contradiction with the leadership. The leadership, they were telling them not to do the thing that they were doing, expropriating the means of production of the bosses, because it wasn't in the program. So there was also a very, very tensional relationship between the rank and file of workers with a political identity to the leadership. I think that is absolutely clear in the Chilean Revolution. Of course, this group influenced by the Cuban Revolution, MIR, they openly said that the only way to defeat the capitalist system was by arms and insurrection against the established order. That's true. We do believe that, you know, the only way to get rid of this system is by violent means. But who is at the center of that resistance with a rifle in the hands? It isn't the peasantry, or it isn't the shantytown dwellers. It's the working class. Why? Because the working class has the power to paralyze the country completely in seconds, and they are organized you know, in the case of Chile, los cordones industriales. So we say, yeah, the armed struggle is necessary to conquer socialism, but who is the center of the armed struggle is a question. It's a question that we have to put. Now, how do we break the army? Which is another question that it was posed. Well, we do have the experience of the Chilean Revolution, the Russian Revolution. There, the army didn't go, you know, to a complete loyalty to the Tsar. They said, no, we're dying, we're hungry, yeah, we don't have any shoes or boots, and we're dying by thousands. I don't want to fight anymore. And went to the city, joined the workers, and the Tsar, the apparatus of the state, was without, you know, weapons. That is the reason. In revolutionary times, very few people died because the ruling class doesn't have the armory to kill us. The soldiers come at our side. And in fact, correct me this if I'm wrong, I think who was the great director who made a film about the Russian Revolution in St. Petersburg? More people died making, you know, the film about revolution than the actual revolution. And I think that's a fact. Comrade, check it, please. Another comrade talk about the introduction of neoliberalism. He is absolutely correct. Not long after Pinochet took over, there was this Chicago boys who studied in Chicago, and they came back with a very clear problem. We need to impose this neoliberalism. Okay?
Can you come to an end in the next minute, Mario?
Sorry, next minute?
Yeah,
Okay.
like last minute,
Okay.
please. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and they did it. And in Chile was the first sort of, you know, imposition of neoliberalism, and then it was worldwide. And they imposed neoliberalism with the tanks rolling the school of the workers. Finally, comrade, very finally, because we do have very little time, I believe very strongly in building a revolutionary party, because the experience of Chile, it will be in my memory and in my comrades' memory until the end of my life. It was an enormous defeat. It was a defeat that we have to reflect. So what is the way out of the new age of catastrophe? That is all at once, you know, climate change, imperialist war, strikes, racism, is to build a genuine revolutionary party in a living contact with the forces that resisting capitalism, either be it in strikes, either be it against racism, against transphobia, against immigration. There we're going to grow with our own identity. And therefore, the Chilean experience showed the vital necessity for that revolutionary organization. Thank you very much, comrade. I am very pleased I have spoken to you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate having you here. And yeah, bye Mario. Thank you so much. So für alle, die jetzt noch...
Thank you very much, comrade.
Thanks a lot. Okay, für alle, die noch per Zoom zugeschaltet sind und hier sind, ihr habt genau Mario gehört und die Lehren von der chilenischen Revolution und der Niederlage und dem Coup, dem Militärputsch, dass es ganz essentiell ist, die Keime einer revolutionären Partei im Hier und Jetzt und bevor einer revolutionären Organisation schon anzufangen zu bauen. Wir sind in Verbindung mit der International Socialist Tendency, der internationalen sozialistischen Tendenz, aus der beispielsweise auch Mario 9 kommt und die verschiedene Sektionen auf der ganzen Welt habt. Wenn ihr Interesse habt, euch diesem Projekt anzuschließen und eben die Notwendigkeit einer revolutionären Partei für eine Revolution seht, schließt euch uns gerne an. Genau, kommt gerne auf mich zu oder auf andere Genossinnen und Genossen, die hier sind. Und genau, wir können gerne drüber sprechen. Ich hoffe, ihr habt es genossen bis jetzt und wir können gerne weiter in eine Diskussion jetzt hier im Raum gehen und würden dann Zoom abschalten. Dankeschön.